They said money could buy anything. But that morning, David Carter learned how wrong that idea was. For 7 years, his daughter Lily had never spoken a single word, not to her mother, not to him, not to the doctors who filled their mansion with promises and plans. Every specialist said the same thing: she can speak, but something inside has locked her voice away. He had paid for hospitals, for flights, for machines that hummed in soft rooms. He had flown experts across oceans. He had built a therapy room inside the house, yet the halls still echoed with quiet. No laughter, no words, only footsteps and the soft hiss of air moving through rooms that shone like mirrors. That morning he sat in his office. A wall of screens watched the grounds. A movement flashed on the feed by the back steps near the bins. He widened the view, then froze. Lily was outside, sitting on the step, her legs folded, her small hands in her lap. Beside her sat the new maid, Nina Brooks, a poor black woman who had started only a week ago. Nina held an empty glass bottle. She set it to her lips, blew across the rim. A low note rolled through the air, soft and steady. She smiled. She said one clear word: "Listen." Lily watched the bottle, her face calm, her eyes bright in the morning light. When Nina blew again, Lily lifted her hand, as if the sound rose like a bird and she could catch it. David leaned closer to the screen, his hand on the desk. He had never seen Lily like this, not with tutors, not with therapists. The door clicked. Grace stood there, barefoot, her robe tied loosely. She saw his face. She followed his eyes to the screen. She breathed out, "Oh God." They watched together, still and quiet. Nina tapped the bottle with a spoon, one light ring, then drew a smiley face on the dusty step with her finger. She drew a second face, smaller, beside it. She pointed to the first, then to herself, then to the second, then to Lily. Her mouth shaped the word friend. Grace whispered, "She likes her." David nodded, his throat tight. He remembered birthdays that did not work. He remembered therapy goals written on charts. He remembered the way silence pressed on a child's shoulders like a heavy coat. Nina unwrapped a half sandwich from a napkin, peanut butter and bread, simple and warm. She held it out. Lily looked at it, then at Nina, then took a small bite, then another. Nina laughed softly, her eyes kind. Lily's hands relaxed, her mouth curved a small smile. Nina set the bottle to Lily's lips and waited. Lily tried to blow, no sound came. She tried again. A thin note trembled and faded. Nina clapped once, a small clap that fit the size of the sound. Lily tried again. The note grew, barely, but it grew. David felt something inside him loosen. Grace said, "We should go outside." David said, "Not yet, let them be." They watched while the light shifted across the stone. A gardener pushed a cart past the edge of the frame. He paused when he saw Lily's face, then turned away, quiet and careful. Nina pointed to the bin, to the step, to herself, to Lily, as if drawing a circle around them both. Lily lifted the bottle and pointed to Nina, then touched her own chest. Nina nodded, patient and steady. She took Lily's hand without forcing, palm to palm, a soft promise, "I am here." A soft knock came at the office door. The butler spoke, "Sir, the driver is ready. The board call is in 20 minutes." David kept his eyes on the screen. "Cancel it, a family matter." The butler nodded and left. Grace squeezed his arm. "Thank you." Outside, Nina stood and dusted her knees, then held out her hand. Lily took it, bottle tucked under her arm. They walked along the edge of the yard, where shade touched the grass. Nina knelt at a crack where a tiny yellow flower had pushed through the stone. She breathed it in. She smiled with simple joy. Lily knelt beside her and did the same. David said, "If we go slowly." Grace nodded. They left the office, down the long hallway, past the glass room with charts. At the back door they paused. Nina heard the hinge. She looked up, guarded for a breath, then open again. She waited. David raised his hand, a small wave. Grace stepped out first, her voice gentle. "May we sit?" Nina glanced at Lily, then nodded. They sat on the step, all four together, stone under knee, sun on shoulders. The bottle lay warm in Lily's lap. Nina spoke to the child, not to the money, to the child. "We can make a sound together, only if you want." Lily pressed her lips to the glass. The note came round and fuller. Nina found a second jar by the wall. She blew a higher note. The sounds crossed like two threads. Grace cried quietly with relief. David looked at Lily, not at a case, at a girl with a sound inside her. The wind moved, leaves made a soft clap. A dog barked somewhere far, a car door shut on the street. The world went on. In this small circle, a door opened without a key. Nina said, "You are safe." Lily touched her chest, then touched Nina's, then her mother's, then her father's. 4 small taps. A map of home learning to breathe. The kitchen clock chimed. 4 notes slipped through the open door. Lily looked up, her mouth parted. A word rested there, close and alive. She did not speak today. Not yet, but hope sat down among them and refused to leave. David felt the weight. Grace held his hand. Nina smiled. Lily held the bottle close and breathed. The next morning began quieter than usual, but it was not the same kind of quiet the Carters were used to. It was softer, lighter, like the calm that comes after rain. Grace woke early and stood by Lily's door. For the first time in years, she heard gentle humming. It wasn't clear singing, but it was sound, tiny and broken, yet real. She pressed her hand to her mouth and whispered, "Thank you, God." When she opened the door, she saw Nina sitting on the carpet, folding Lily's small clothes into neat piles. Lily sat beside her, matching every move. A towel, a shirt, a smile. Nina spoke in her warm voice. "Every shirt has a story. You fold it with care, and it stays happy longer." Lily looked at her hands like they carried magic. Grace stood at the doorway, silent. Nina noticed her but didn't stop. She kept folding, kept smiling, kept speaking softly. Lily looked up and waved her mother in. It was the first time she had ever done that. Grace sat down slowly, her knees shaking. She watched her daughter help fold the towels, her lips pressed together, her little face peaceful. After a while, Nina said, "Would you like to help me water the flowers later?" Lily nodded once, her eyes bright. Grace felt tears fill her eyes. For years, the child had only nodded when teachers begged her to answer. But now the nod came naturally, with light behind it. Grace looked at Nina, her voice trembling. "I don't know how you do it." Nina smiled faintly. "I don't do anything, ma'am. I just listen. Sometimes children talk in ways that don't need words." Grace wiped her face and stood. "Please, call me Grace." Nina looked surprised, then smiled again, quiet but sincere. Downstairs, David watched from his office window as the 2 figures stepped into the garden. The child held a small watering can, spilling more water on her shoes than the flowers. Nina bent low beside her, laughing softly. Lily laughed too, the sound silent, but her joy loud enough to reach the window. David didn't know how to feel. Relief sat beside pride, but pride came with fear. He had spent years trusting experts, and none of them had helped. How could a maid do in days what doctors couldn't in years? He needed to understand. That evening, he called Nina to the study. The lights were warm, and the air smelled faintly of polish and coffee. She stood by the door, unsure if she was in trouble. "Please, sit," he said. She didn't move until he gestured again. She sat carefully on the edge of the chair. "I watched you with Lily," he began. "I don't know what you're doing, but it's working. She's different." Nina lowered her eyes. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep. I just talk to her like she's any child. I don't treat her like she's broken." David rubbed his temples. "Do you know how many people we've hired to help her? Therapists, specialists, speech doctors. All of them failed. Then someone we barely know, walk in, and she smiles for the first time." "I'm sorry if that bothers you," she said softly. "It doesn't bother me," he said quickly. "It confuses me." Nina folded her hands. "Sometimes children need peace before they can speak. When I came here, I saw a house full of silence, but it wasn't quiet. It was heavy. I just tried to make it light again." David stared at her. Her words were simple, but they cut deep. He thought about the way he filled the house with expensive things, how he kept people working but never laughing. "Tell me something," he said after a pause. "When you were sitting with her by the garbage bins, why there?" Nina smiled faintly. "Because that's where I felt human, sir. I was taking a break, eating my sandwich near the bins, and she came to me. She didn't look at my clothes or my hands. She just looked at me like I was real." He said nothing. When she stood to leave, he stopped her. "From now on, spend as much time with her as you need. You'll be paid for every extra hour." Nina shook her head. "I don't do this for money, sir. I just want her to feel free." For the first time in years, David didn't have a reply. He simply nodded. That night, Grace found him sitting in Lily's empty therapy room. The walls were covered with drawings and charts that meant nothing now. "She's getting better," Grace said gently. David nodded. "Yes, but I can't explain why. I feel like everything I believed in doesn't matter anymore." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe this isn't something to explain. Maybe it's something to feel." The next few days passed with quiet changes. Lily began to hum softly during breakfast. She followed Nina to the laundry room, helping to separate colors from whites. Sometimes she scribbled small drawings on scraps of paper, two figures holding hands, one taller, one smaller. Grace noticed something else too. Nina always told stories while working. Simple stories about her childhood, her mother, and her son, Marcus. She told them in a gentle tone, always ending with hope. Lily listened closely, her eyes following every word like they were music. One afternoon, as Nina cleaned the hallway mirrors, she noticed Lily standing behind her reflection. The girl held two bottles in her hands. She lifted one, blew across the top, and smiled when it made a sound. Nina laughed. "You kept it?" Lily nodded proudly, her tiny face glowing. That evening, when Grace tucked Lily into bed, the child did something unexpected. She reached out and whispered a small sound. It wasn't a word, just a breath shaped like one. Grace froze, her heart heavy with hope. "What did you say, baby?" she asked softly. Lily only smiled, rolled over, and closed her eyes. But Grace knew. The wall was cracking. Downstairs, Nina stood alone in the kitchen, wiping the counters. She looked tired but peaceful. Her phone buzzed. She looked down and frowned. It was a message from a number she hadn't seen in a while. It said, "Mom, I need you." Her hands trembled. Her son, Marcus, had written. She hadn't seen him for months. He lived in a youth shelter across town. She dropped the rag, leaned against the sink, and whispered a small prayer. She didn't know that the next message would break her heart, or that Lily was about to give her something greater than any miracle money could buy. The house slept quietly that night, but somewhere deep inside its walls, something was already changing, something that would test love in its purest form. The morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that made even the flowers bow. Nina woke early, her hands shaking slightly as she held her phone. The message from her son still glowed on the screen. "Mom, I need you." She tried calling, but no one answered. The call went straight to voicemail. When she stepped into the kitchen, her eyes were tired but her face remained calm. Grace noticed right away. "Are you all right, Nina?" "Yes, ma'am," she said, forcing a small smile. "Just didn't sleep well." Grace nodded. though she could see something deeper hiding behind that answer. Later that morning, as Nina was cleaning the hallway, David appeared. "Good morning," he said softly. He wasn't used to greeting staff, but somehow the words felt natural now. "Lily is looking for you." Nina smiled faintly. "I'll be right there, sir." Upstairs, Lily was waiting near the window, holding the glass bottle tightly. When Nina entered, her face lit up like the sun had slipped into the room. She lifted the bottle, motioning for Nina to blow first. Nina smiled, leaned down, and blew softly. The low hum filled the room. Lily copied her. For a while, everything felt simple again. Nina forgot the message, forgot the worry. It was just her and this child, two hearts speaking in silence. But when her phone buzzed again, the sound cut through the peace. She excused herself and checked. This time, it was a call from a police officer. Her hands went cold. "Hello?" she said, her voice trembling. "Is this Miss Brooks?" "Yes. This is Officer Daniels from Millstone Police Department. Your son, Marcus Brooks, was involved in an incident at the youth shelter last night." Nina felt her knees weaken. "What happened?" "There was a fight. He says he tried to protect another boy, but the staff says he was the aggressor. He's being held until a hearing." Nina's lips parted, but no sound came. He's just a boy," she whispered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You'll need to come down to the station to speak with him." The line went quiet. Nina leaned against the wall, her breath uneven. She couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't even afford the taxi ride. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering a prayer she had said too many times. Just then, she felt a small tug on her dress. Lily was standing there, eyes wide, holding the glass bottle against her chest. She had heard enough to know something was wrong. Nina knelt, trying to hide her tears. "It's okay, baby," she said softly. "Just something I have to fix." Lily shook her head and reached out, touching the tears on Nina's cheek with her small hand. Grace walked in at that moment, saw Nina kneeling, saw the phone shaking in her hand. "What's wrong?" she asked quickly. "My son," Nina said, her voice breaking. "He's been arrested, ma'am. He didn't do anything wrong, but they think he did. I need to go to him." Grace didn't hesitate. "Of course. Go, take my driver." Nina blinked. I can't let you do that. You've done more for us than anyone ever has," Grace said. "Please, go." Nina's lips trembled. She whispered, "Thank you," and rushed to the door. As she left, Lily stood frozen. She didn't fully understand what arrested meant, but she understood pain. She understood fear. And the moment Nina's car disappeared down the road, she ran to her room, clutching the glass bottle tightly. David came home an hour later and found Grace sitting on the couch, her face pale. She told him everything. He listened, silent. "She's at the police station," Grace said. "Her son was defending another child, but they think he started a fight." David rubbed his chin, deep in thought. "Do we know which precinct?" "Yes, Millstone City Police." David nodded slowly. "I'll make a few calls." Grace looked at him. "You would do that?" "She gave our daughter something we couldn't. The least I can do is return the favor." While David made the calls, something else was happening upstairs. Lily sat on the floor, staring at a picture she had drawn that morning, two stick figures holding hands beside a big blue sky. Her chest felt heavy. She picked up the glass bottle and placed it to her lips, trying to blow. But this time, no sound came. She tried again, harder. Still silence. Her small hands began to shake. Tears filled her eyes. She dropped the bottle and whispered, barely audible, "Nina." It was the first time she had spoken anyone's name. When Grace heard the faint sound, she rushed in, her heart racing. She found Lily on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "what did you say?" Lily pointed to the window, where the car had left. "Nina." she whispered again, her voice fragile but real. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She knelt and hugged her daughter tightly. "We'll see her soon, I promise," she said. Hours passed. The mansion grew quiet again. The sun had fallen, leaving the rooms painted in orange and blue. At the police station, Nina sat in a cold room, waiting. When she finally saw her son, Marcus, her heart broke. He had a bruise on his cheek, but his eyes were steady. "I didn't do anything, Mom," he said. "They were picking on a little boy. I stopped them." Nina held his hand. "I believe you, baby." Moments later, a tall man in a dark coat walked into the room. It was David Carter. "Mr. Carter?" Nina stood up quickly. "What are you?" He raised a hand gently. "You don't have to thank me. Let's just fix this." With a single call and a few quiet words, the officer returned and said Marcus could go home. "We'll review the footage," he said. "Looks like your son was protecting someone." Nina's eyes filled with tears. She turned to David. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You already did, Nina. You gave me my daughter back." As they left the station, Marcus hugged his mother tightly. Nina looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Back at the mansion, Lily was sitting by the window, waiting. When she saw the car lights pull into the driveway, she ran downstairs barefoot. Grace followed, shocked by her sudden energy. Nina stepped inside, still in her coat. Before she could speak, Lily ran to her, wrapping her tiny arms around her waist. Then, in a soft, trembling voice, she whispered her first clear words. "Don't cry." The room went silent. Grace covered her mouth, tears falling freely. David stood frozen near the door. Nina knelt, her eyes wide, her breath caught. What did you say?" Lily smiled through her tears and repeated, "Don't cry." Nina broke down, holding her close. "Oh, baby," she whispered, "I'm not crying anymore." In that moment, every wall in that mansion broke. The silence that had ruled their lives melted into sound, the softest, purest miracle of all. That night, no one could sleep. Not because of fear, but because the house was finally alive. The next morning, sunlight poured through the mansion's tall windows like it had been waiting for years to come in. The air smelled different, lighter somehow. Grace stood by the doorway of Lily's room, her hand over her heart, still replaying the words from the night before. "Don't cry." Those two small words had done what no amount of therapy or fortune ever could. The house that once held quiet sadness now hummed with something new, something fragile but real. Inside the room, Nina sat beside Lily, brushing her hair with gentle strokes. "You slept well?" she asked softly. Lily nodded, still clutching her glass bottle like it was treasure. When Grace walked in, Lily looked up at her and smiled. It wasn't the shy smile she used to give. It was full, warm, alive. Grace walked over and knelt beside her. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Good morning," Lily whispered. Grace froze. Tears filled her eyes again, but she smiled through them. "You spoke again," she whispered. Lily giggled softly, and the sound filled the room like music. Downstairs, David stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He had spent most of the night awake, thinking about what he'd witnessed. For 7 years, he had searched for answers in hospitals, in money, in people who spoke in scientific words. Yet the miracle had come from the one person he had almost overlooked, a maid who barely had anything but her heart. When Nina walked in with Lily's small hand wrapped in hers, David turned. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at his daughter, standing tall beside Nina. "Morning, Daddy," Lily said quietly. David's hand shook, and the cup slipped from his grasp, landing softly on the carpet. He didn't care. He walked over slowly, knelt, and held his daughter close. "Morning, my little girl," he whispered. Nina turned away, tears forming in her eyes. Grace stepped forward and touched her arm. Stay, she said softly. Lily looked up at her father and smiled. Can Nina stay with me today? David looked at Nina, then nodded. As long as she wants. For the rest of the day, laughter filled the mansion like sunlight through old windows. Lily followed Nina everywhere, the kitchen, the garden, the laundry room. She talked in small words, testing each one like it was new. At one point, Nina showed her how to fold napkins into flowers. Like this, she said, folding carefully. Lily copied her, but the shape came out wrong. She frowned. It doesn't have to be perfect, Nina said kindly. See, this one looks funny too, but it's still a flower. Lily smiled again. Grace stood at the kitchen door, watching. You know, she said, I haven't seen her smile this much since she was a baby. Nina looked down modestly. She just needed someone to remind her what happy sounds like. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Marcus, Nina's son. David had arranged for him to stay with them for a while, away from the shelter and the trouble. He stepped inside, nervous and shy. Mom said I should thank you, sir, he said, looking at David. You don't need to thank me, son, David said. Just help your mother keep this house full of laughter. Marcus smiled, nodding. When Lily saw him, she hesitated for a moment, then walked over and handed him the glass bottle. You try, she said quietly. Marcus blinked, surprised. You talk? Lily nodded, smiling proudly. You try, she repeated. He laughed softly, took the bottle, and blew across the top. The hum filled the air again, gentle and low. Lily clapped her hands. Grace covered her mouth, overwhelmed. This, she whispered, is what love sounds like. As days passed, the bond between Lily and Nina grew stronger. The mansion, once cold and distant, now felt like a home. The staff who used to move quietly out of fear began smiling again. Even the gardener started humming as he worked. One evening, Nina sat with Grace on the balcony. The sky was orange, the kind of color that only comes after peace. Grace turned to her and said softly, You've changed this house, Nina. You've changed us. Nina shook her head. No, ma'am. Love did. I just reminded it where to go. Grace smiled. You should stop calling me ma'am. You're family now. Nina laughed quietly. Old habits die slow. Below them, David was teaching Lily how to throw a small ball to Marcus. Each time she caught it, she shouted, I did it. The sound echoed through the yard. Nina's eyes filled again, but this time with joy. Do you hear that? She whispered. That's her heart speaking. Grace nodded. And to think, it all started near the garbage bins. They laughed softly together, the sound blending with the evening wind. As night came, Lily asked Nina to read her a story. Nina sat by her bed, holding an old book she had found on a shelf. But before she began, Lily reached up and touched her cheek. Thank you, she said. Nina smiled. For what, sweetheart? For giving me my voice. Nina leaned forward and kissed her forehead. You always had it, baby. You just needed to remember where you left it. Lily giggled, closed her eyes, and drifted to sleep. In the doorway, Grace and David stood together, hands clasped. We owe her everything, Grace whispered. David nodded. No, we owe her a place in our family. As they watched Nina gently tuck Lily's blanket, the truth settled deep inside them. This woman had healed their home not through power, not through knowledge, but through love. Down the hall, Marcus stood at the window, looking out at the dark sky. He whispered a quiet prayer for his mother, for the chance she had been given, and for the girl who now spoke because of her. That night, the mansion slept in peace. For the first time in 7 years, there were no heavy silences, no echoes of sorrow, only the soft breathing of a house reborn, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of 2 glass bottles singing in harmony under the moonlight. Weeks turned into months, and the Carter mansion was never the same again. The laughter that once seemed impossible now echoed through every hallway. Lily spoke a little more each day, her voice soft but steady, her words often small but full of meaning. She no longer hid behind silence. She sang along with the radio in the mornings, asked questions about the world, and told stories about her dreams. Every time she spoke, it felt like a miracle repeating itself. One afternoon, Grace walked into the living room and found Lily sitting on the floor beside Marcus and Nina. They were playing a spelling game with wooden blocks. Lily pointed at one and said proudly, "This one is my name." Nina clapped her hands gently. "Yes, it is, baby. Lily." Marcus smiled. "She's getting better every day." Grace sat down beside them. "That's because she has the best teachers in the world." Lily looked up. "You too, Mommy." Grace's heart swelled with emotion. She smiled and pulled her daughter into her arms. "I love you so much," she whispered. Lily whispered back, "I love you too." For a long moment, the room was filled with quiet happiness. Then Lily looked toward Nina and said softly, "Nina, will you teach me your songs?" Nina blinked. "My songs?" "Yes," Lily said. "The ones you sing when you clean. The ones that sound like hugs." Grace chuckled softly. "Songs that sound like hugs, that's beautiful." Nina smiled and began humming one of the old tunes her mother used to sing back home. It was slow and warm, with words that spoke of hope and grace. Lily tried to hum along, her tiny voice uncertain at first, but she didn't stop. David, passing through the hallway, stopped when he heard the sound. He leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. His daughter's voice, though small, filled the air with something priceless. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. That evening, the family had dinner together in the large dining hall. For the first time, it didn't feel cold or distant. The long table that once separated them now felt like a bridge. Nina and Marcus sat with them too. Lily spoke between small bites. "Daddy, Marcus said he wants to be a teacher." David smiled. "That's a wonderful dream." Marcus nodded shyly. "Maybe I'll help kids like Lily someday." David's eyes softened. "You already have." Nina looked down, holding back tears. She still couldn't believe how much her life had changed. A few months ago, she was a maid trying to survive each day, her son in a shelter, her heart tired from too many disappointments. Now, she was part of something she never imagined: a family. After dinner, David asked Nina to meet him in the study. She walked in nervously, not sure what to expect. "I wanted to thank you," David said. "But thank you isn't enough. What you've done for Lily, for all of us, I can't repay it with money." "Sir, you don't have to," Nina said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I want to do something meaningful." He slid an envelope across the desk. Nina looked at it, confused. "It's not money," he said quickly. "It's a letter. I've spoken to the director at Greenwood Early Learning Center. They're offering you a position head of the Children's Development Program." Nina blinked. "I'm not qualified for that, sir." David smiled. "You're more than qualified. You did what trained professionals couldn't. You gave a child her voice. That's what real teaching is." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said kindly. Nina wiped her eyes and nodded. "Yes, sir." Outside the study, Grace stood listening, smiling quietly. When Nina stepped out, Grace hugged her. "You've earned this. You've changed lives, Nina. Don't ever doubt that." The days that followed were full of new beginnings. Nina started working part-time at the center, helping children who struggled with speech and confidence. Lily visited often, always running into her arms the moment she arrived. One afternoon, while sitting together in the garden, Lily said softly, "I want to help kids like me when I grow up." Nina smiled. "You already help, sweetheart. Every time you speak, you give someone hope." Years passed gently. Lily grew into a bright, confident teenager. She still kept the glass bottle, polished and placed on her desk. It reminded her where her voice began. When she turned 16, she gave a short speech at the Greenwood Children's Gala, standing in front of hundreds of guests. Her voice was calm and strong. "For 7 years," she began, "I didn't speak a word. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't know how to be heard. Then one person came into my life, a woman who didn't try to fix me, who just saw me. Her name is Nina Brooks, and she gave me something money never could, my voice." The crowd stood in silence, before breaking into applause. David and Grace held hands tightly, tears glistening in their eyes. After the event, Lily hugged Nina and whispered, "You changed my world." Nina smiled through tears. "No, baby, you changed mine." From that day, Lily and Nina started the Hope Voice Project, a small foundation for children who had lost their confidence to speak. Together, they built classrooms filled with laughter and light. The old Carter Mansion became the program's headquarters, renamed the Carter Brooks Center for Children. On the front steps, where everything had begun, they placed a small plaque that read, "Even old things can sing." Every Thursday morning, Nina and Lily met there, sitting on the same stone steps with 2 glass bottles. They blew softly across the tops, letting the low hum float into the open air. Sometimes David joined them, sometimes Grace, sometimes Marcus. And every time, that simple sound reminded them of how love had turned silence into music. The world called it a miracle, but to them, it was something far greater. It was love learning how to speak. And from that day on, the Carter Mansion never knew silence again. 10 years later, the Carter Brooks Center for Children had grown beyond anyone's dreams. What began as a small room inside a mansion had become a national foundation with branches in 3 states. The story of the little mute girl who spoke for the first time because of a maid had touched hearts across the country. Parents, teachers, and doctors visited the center every week, hoping to understand the power behind it. On a calm Saturday morning, sunlight washed over the white marble floors of the center's new building. The walls were decorated with children's drawings, each one telling its own story of healing. In the middle of the courtyard stood a bronze sculpture, a small girl holding a glass bottle up to the sky. At the base were the words, "Even old things can sing." Inside one of the classrooms, now in her 20s, Lily Carter sat cross-legged with a group of children. Some were shy, others loud, a few completely silent. She held a bottle in her hand and blew across the top, the same soft hum she learned from Nina years ago. "Who wants to try?" she asked gently. A small boy with hearing aids raised his hand. He took the bottle, tried to blow, and giggled when it made a sound. Lily clapped softly. "See? You made music." The boy laughed again, and others joined in. For Lily, this sound was the proof of everything she had once prayed for: life, joy, and hope. Nina entered quietly, now older, her hair streaked with silver. She wore her same warm smile, the one that had healed so much pain. When Lily noticed her, she stood and hugged her tight. "You came," Lily whispered. "Wouldn't miss it," Nina replied, her voice still soft, still full of kindness. They sat together at the edge of the class, watching the children. Nina whispered, "You've turned this place into something beautiful." Lily shook her head. "You did, Nina. I just carried the torch." Nina smiled. "You were always meant to lead. I was just the bridge." Later that day, in the center's garden, the Carter family gathered for the 10-year anniversary celebration. Guests, donors, and families filled the yard, but for David and Grace, nothing mattered more than watching their daughter walk confidently among the crowd. When Lily stepped up to the podium, the garden fell silent. The air was still, and the moment carried weight. 10 years ago, she began, her voice calm and steady, I lived in a world where silence was my language. I didn't speak, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't feel seen. My parents tried everything, but what healed me wasn't medicine or therapy. It was love from a woman who saw me for who I was, not what I lacked. She turned toward Nina, who sat in the front row, tears already in her eyes. That woman, Lily continued, taught me that even broken things can make music, that every voice matters, even the quiet ones. This center exists because of her, because of the maid who changed my life. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping and crying. Nina covered her face, overwhelmed. David stood beside her and gently helped her up. "Take the stage," he whispered. Nina shook her head, but Lily extended her hand, smiling through tears. "Please, Nina," she said softly. "Come." Nina walked up slowly, trembling, and stood beside Lily. When the applause settled, she took a deep breath. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said. "I was just a maid trying to keep a job and raise a son. But God had a plan I didn't see. He brought me here, to a family who showed me that kindness is never wasted. I didn't save Lily. She saved me too." The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Grace held David's hand, whispering, "She's right." After the event, as the guests left and the sun began to fade, Lily and Nina sat together on the old stone steps, the same ones from years ago. The garden lights glowed softly around them. Lily placed 2 glass bottles on the step between them. "Do you remember?" she asked. Nina smiled, her eyes watery. "How could I forget?" They blew softly across the tops. The 2 notes met in the air, blending into one gentle hum. It was the same sound that started everything. After a quiet moment, Nina spoke. "You know, when I first saw you sitting by the bins, I thought you were lost. But maybe I was the one who needed to be found." Lily smiled. "We found each other." Marcus came out from the garden path, now grown, wearing a suit with the center's emblem on his chest. "They're waiting for you inside," he said. "The board wants a photo." Nina chuckled. "The board," she repeated softly. "Imagine that." Lily laughed and stood, holding Nina's hand. "Your family, Nina. Always have been." They walked inside together. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed, and the sound of children's voices filled the building like music. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, David and Grace walked through the quiet halls. They stopped by the framed photograph, hanging near the entrance, a picture of Lily as a child, sitting beside Nina on the mansion steps, both holding glass bottles. Grace touched the frame and whispered, "She gave us more than our daughter's voice. She gave us our hearts back." David nodded. Some people work miracles without even knowing it. Outside, the garden lights swayed gently in the evening breeze. In the stillness, a faint sound floated through the air, the soft hum of 2 glass bottles. Lily and Nina were still sitting outside, side by side, blowing softly into the bottles, laughing quietly as the notes rose and faded into the night sky. The sound carried far across Greenwood Hills, soft as a prayer, strong as love itself. It was the same melody that once brought a silent child back to life, a reminder that love speaks in ways words never can, and that even old things and broken hearts can still sing. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that some miracles do not come from science, or money, or power. They come from love. Little Lily had every luxury this world could offer, yet her heart stayed locked in silence, until a poor maid named Nina showed her what real care felt like. Nina did not heal her with medicine. She healed her with kindness, with patience, with warmth. She saw a child, not a problem, and that made all the difference. The world called it a miracle, but in truth, it was love doing what love always does, changing lives quietly, without asking for anything in return. So, dear viewers, let this story remind us that no act of kindness is ever too small. Sometimes the simplest heart can light up the darkest home, and one gentle word can give someone their voice again. Before you go, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what lesson you learned from this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so more hearts can be touched by stories like this. And if you want more emotional stories like this one, comment "more stories" and you will be the first to get the next one. Now, before you go, answer these few questions. 1. What did you learn from Nina's kindness? 2. Do you believe love can heal more than medicine? 3. Have you ever helped someone who just needed to be seen? 4. Which part of Lily's journey touched your heart the most? 5. Do you believe every home can change if love walks in? Thank you for watching, and remember, even the quietest hearts can sing again when they are loved.